have been part of the mesothelium. Now, because it's the umbilicus, this is also going to have associated with it, depending how close you are to the embryo or to the placenta, a syncytium. All right, so looking at the shape of these cells, this is probably part of a syncytium, but technically it's a mesothelium because it's on the outside of this organ. All right. Would not do that to you in an exam because what's a syncytium? All right, we are not going to do syncytium, but what it is it's an epithelial layer where the cells have actually fused to each other so that you don't have cell walls between the cells, but they are an epithelium, all right, and that is called a syncytium.
Thank you. I can tell why.
No problem. Hey, that's kind of like jargon, you know. You get used to using the terms. And so that was actually a good question. Right. So if I had a pointer going from here to around about here and said name this tissue.
Loose connective.
Loose connective tissue. All right.
Do you want areola?
I probably would give you areola tissue, but loose connective tissue is probably more accurate. Okay. Yes, we do call it areola tissue, but again, it's one of those terms that you very seldom see used. Where areola comes from for areola tissue is if you look around a nipple, and the nipple is an areola, right? The tissue directly around that areolus is loose connective tissue. So I think that's where the term areola tissue came from, or space. Right, so if I spanned the pointer here and said name this tissue.
Dense, irregular.
Dense, irregular connective tissue. How do we tell the difference between the two? Now notice I did not go and stick my pointer over here, okay, because this is kind of that what I call the hybrid tissue. It's not one or the other. But look at this. Thick collagen fibers, a few fibroblasts in them, all right, not many cells here. Going down to this tissue at the surface here, look at this, lots and lots of cells, right? Look at the size of these little fibers relative to the size of the cells. Go back up here, okay? Big fibers, few cells. These fibers are not oriented all in the same direction, they're kind of all over the place. So dense, irregular connective tissue. And remember, if we're talking about stroma of glands, stroma in the glands is a form of loose connective tissue, okay? So if we gave you something like this, and I put my pointer in here, and I asked you what kind of cell is this? All right, mast cell. This is the only cell that we're showing you that we give it this toluidine blue staining so that we get that metachromatic staining of the granules. Remember, because now we have this ginormous cell, but look at the size of the nucleus. Where the top of my pointer is, the top of that there is the nucleus of the cell. The rest of this is cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm here is chock-a-block full of granules, right?
You got a question?
Yes, question.
Yeah, so I'm confused now, so the myoepithelium and loop connective tissue, are they interchangeable? I'm not sure which one is which.
The myoepithelial cells were the cells that were right down at the base of your secretory acinus, up against that basement membrane. Those were your myoepithelial cells. The myoepithelial cells form part of the stroma, okay? So because they're sitting in that loose connective tissue. Between each acinus, you've got that space, all right, and it looks kind of empty because it is loose connective tissue, all right? So the myoepithelial cells are specifically the cells that are up against the base of the acini, right?
What about the lamina propria?
Right, lamina propria is going to be a term when we start doing organs. You'll see that we talk about the lamina propria. Lamina propria is the connective tissue directly under the epithelium. And from looking at all of these, we know that when we're looking at directly underneath an epithelium, we're generally looking at loose connective tissue. All right? So lamina propria is generally loose connective tissue. But the lamina propria, the term, actually describes where it is. So if you're talking about lamina propria, you're talking about connective tissue underneath an epithelium. Whereas not all loose connective tissue is necessarily lamina propria. All right, here we have our gyrophilic fibers. Be thankful I wouldn't ask you what kind of staining is this. Right, it's a silver stain, so we have these silver stain, these dark staining fibers. Name these fibers. There's two possible correct answers here. Reticular fibers, type 3 collagen fibers, both of those are correct answers. Okay? Now, with the same staining, remember we have another type of fiber that also stains with silver-based stains. And here we have it over here. And you can see it's actually sitting around this little blood vessel. And so what kind of fibers would you assume that these are? Elastic fibers. So naming the fibers here would be elastic fibers.
Is that always in a vessel? That's always going to be found in a vessel?
Elastic fibers are not necessarily always in the vessel because the other place that we do see elastic fibers is in the skin. All right. We don't have examples of those for you. But if we stain the skin with a silver stain, you should see fine little elastic fibers in the skin as well.
What about also elastic cartilage?
Right, and of course elastic cartilage, very good. Yes.
Step 1, cartilage step 2. You gotta remember bone step 1 is of osteogenesis imperfecta. That's step 1. Oh. Cartoon.
All right, so if I said name this tissue, this is a tough one, be careful. Name this tissue. Go through and look at this. First of all, what have we got here? Long flat cells in places, fairly large cells in places. All right, there's nuclei in the center of this. We've got these little wavy fibers. So this tissue would be elastic tissue. Okay. And if I put the pointer, and the top of the pointer here is pointing at what kind of fiber? Elastic fiber. All right. What kind of cell is this?
Are elastic tissue and reticular tissue a type of loose connective tissue? Because the way it's organized in the lab, underneath loose connective tissue.